I want to start and tell you a little bit about why we're here, and a little bit about the way we think about impact investing, a little bit about what we've been seeing in the work we've been doing, and then sort of give you a little exercise in something that we think is pretty important around this topic, and then discuss it. I encourage questions. I'm gonna do the front end of this, and then Christy's gonna come in a little bit later and talk about also another part of our work. I guess pretty informal. So I guess what started this project, which I will describe in just a few minutes, was our recognition that organizations are spending billions of US dollars trying to achieve social impact, what they call social impact. And when I say organizations, many philanthropies, many NGOs who are the recipients of those dollars are actually spending it. Many corporations are spending it in their corporate social responsibility, sustainability functions. And corporations are spending it within their normal business operations to think about they're creating financial impact, but they're also creating social impact. And so I keep using this term, and I keep hearing this term of social impact. And so what do we mean by social impact? How do we get more of it, if that's what we're trying to do? And how do we know whether we're getting more of it? So the work that Christy and I have done over our careers has been around improving success in organizations and measuring success in organizations. We're both business school professors. We've been professors for most of our careers. I am currently at Rice University in Houston, Texas. Christy's currently at Portland State. Harvard Business School twice. At Stanford Business School, I was at INSEAD, which is in France. So we've had a fair bit of experience teaching, and we've had a fair bit of experience writing and speaking, consulting with organizations. And what we see in both for-profit and nonprofit organizations are concerns and similar challenges around what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and how do we know whether we've accomplished it? Very simply, how do you increase success, and how do you measure success? It's that simple of what we're trying to work on. So we've been doing this work in for-profit and nonprofits for all of our careers. For the last 10 years, Christy and I have spent a lot of it in developing countries. We spent a lot of time in Africa. I think I've worked in about 15 sub-Saharan African countries. We spent a lot of time in Africa, in South America and in Asia. We've done a lot of work in education, both we've developed modules, training of entrepreneurship training for illiterate and innumerate adults related to microfinance. We've worked on entrepreneurship training for primary school children. We've done a lot of work in global health, and as a couple of you know, I've just finished a book on global health, which will be out in April. We've done a fair bit of work on microfinance, and I'm going to talk about the microfinance in just a few minutes. We've worked with organizations extensively, and we've worked with philanthropies, we worked with nonprofits, we worked with for-profits. And we've written extensively about them. And what we see commonly across all these types of organizations is a concern for how do you really know whether you're achieving social impact, and how do you get more of it. And that's true, and I'm not going to spend much time on the corporate side, but it's true in the corporate side too. I was working with Chevron. Chevron is one of the largest corporations in the world in the oil industry. They spend $200 million a year on their corporate social responsibility. And what they were saying to me is, we need help on how to measure success. We're trying to have social impact with those expenditures, and we don't know if we're doing a good job. They said even a bigger problem is we spend $40 billion in our supply chain, employees, purchases of materials, development of communities around where there's oil and gas. And we have no idea what social impact we're having on these communities. We drill offshore for oil, but we have big impacts on the onshore communities. What is that impact? How do we know both the positive and negative aspects of that impact? How do we measure it? And then using those measures, how do we improve the positive negative impacts and reduce the negative social impacts? So that's on the corporate side. We've done a lot of work on nonprofits, and this project has been primarily focused on the foundations and the nonprofits. So for the last year, Christy and I have been talking with organizations, the largest leading organizations in the world and some that are not so well known. So we've been traveling around the US and the UK. So in the UK, we met with an organization called Children's Investment Fund that you may or may not know. It was started less than 10 years ago by a fellow named Chris Hone, made his money in finance. He decided to take $3 or $4 billion US and put it into a foundation devoted to helping children. We were in Seattle with the Gates Foundation. We were in San Francisco with the Hewlett Foundation from Hewlett Packard. Robert Woods Johnson, which is Johnson & Johnson in Princeton, New Jersey. Again, a lot of organizations. And all of them, what we were interested in is, how do you identify your social impact? How do you measure social impact? And how do you get more of it? We've been dealing with nonprofits, and the same question. So with nonprofits and with the foundations, a lot of this is, how do you move to scale? We've got a good idea. That's what we hear from NGOs. We've got a good idea. We want to scale it, but we're not sure how to do it. But we need to make sure we're scaling the right things. And it's hard to move forward with an organization if you don't know exactly what's working and what's not. And so a lot of our work, again, is about, how do you move a good organization to a great organization? And what's particularly interesting about the nonprofit or the NGO world and the foundation world is all of us are interested in trying to improve society or some segment of society. And the question is, how do we do that better? So we want to make our resources more effective. One of the things that we do, and one of the things I've spent a lot of time on the corporate side. So I've done a lot of work with senior managers in large corporations. Corporations you would all know. And Christy and I have done work with Nike and Nissan and pretty Procter & Gamble, pretty major corporations. What we do with for-profit corporations is we think about really carefully articulating our strategy. And you might be surprised, as I was surprised when I started doing this. Organizations are not often as clear about their strategy as they should be. But what do? We think about a strategy, and then we develop what we in the for-profit world call a strategy map or a causal linkage model. A strategy map or a causal linkage model. And we've been doing this globally for the last maybe 20 years. And it's critical to try to do this to try to drive success. And we do this in corporations at the top of organizations. We do it within organizations at various business units. So what does that mean? Think about it in a for-profit sense for a second. In the for-profit sense, we might say what we want, the main thing we want to do in for-profit corporations is make more money. So the question we ask is, how do you do that? In a nonprofit corporation, we typically call these logic models. All what we're trying to do is carefully articulate what is it that we're trying to achieve and how are we going to achieve it? Okay? So that's where we're starting here. And I want to talk to you about this because one of the learnings that we've seen over this last year is a large failure in even very good organizations to have clearly articulated their logic model and have clear measures of success. So let me just very quickly, and I know many of you have done these, but let me just very quickly talk about the 5 components of this, which are inputs. Let me need to write a little smaller. Well, let me put it here. Let me see if I can do this. Inputs, processes, also sometimes called activities. Processes, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. So these are the 5 components of a logic model. So let me describe for you quickly an example. So I mentioned that Christy and I have done a lot of work in microfinance. We know it well, we know it globally, we know the strengths and the weaknesses of microfinance. Christy and I have written some papers on this, and one of the things when we first got involved in microfinance is we were working on, the first paper I did was I did a project on measures for microfinance success. Then as we got into this more deeply, we said, what are you trying to do in microfinance? And we kept hearing, we want to alleviate poverty. So that's what they want to do. They want to alleviate poverty. Now that's a pretty big goal, right? We in microfinance, we're going to solve the poverty problem. Okay, pretty bold. How are you going to do that? So first what we heard was, we're going to make loans. I said, wait a second. You're going to make a loan to someone, and that is going to make the world a better place and solve the poverty problem. Here's what I know. I know that if you were to walk down the streets of Houston or New York, I assume Mumbai, but you were to make a loan or give a gift of $100 to somebody, some of them would do good things with that money. Some would not do such good things with that money. Some would not do good things because they don't have good intentions. Some would not do good things because they don't know what to do with it. What we know in the US is that most businesses fail. That's just the facts. if you were to just walk down the street and give somebody money and say, go do business, the likelihood of success is pretty small. So if what you're telling me is you're going to give money, use financial resources, and that's going to alleviate poverty, I think there's a bunch of gaps in here. You need to explain better how you're going to do this. So what is that? Well, Christy and I said what you need to do is help them make their businesses better. Because the reason they're not paying microfinance in part is they don't make enough money to pay back the loan. So how do you do this? So one of the things that we've advocated is that you need to have a process which trains micro-entrepreneurs or trains people to be better business people. So that's a process, it's an activity. So an organization might say, we are going to do some training. We could be training employees, and then they would be training customers or clients of microfinance. If we do that, we believe that we will be developing better businesses, better micro enterprises. Just to go back to inputs for a moment, we need financial resources. We also need good human resources. And as I was saying before with the retail company, when we think about human resources, and it's a problem, it's something that all organizations think about. Do you hire those really good people, or do you hire people that are not quite as good and train them better? I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, but those are choices you make. And one needs to be conscious of those choices. Okay, so we have some resources. We're going to do some training of micro-enterprises. We're going to train these entrepreneurs. We're probably also going to train these folks on paying back loans. So most microfinance organizations do training, but they train them, you really need to pay back a loan. Now, I already saw a few smiles, but again, if you think about the population, very few people have ever been in the formal financial sector. They've never had loans. They don't know what it means to repay loans. As a matter of fact, I recall we were with one faith-based organization in microfinance, and we had people that said, I don't understand. You're a church organization. You're giving me money because I'm very poor and I need help. Now you want the money back? Why do you want the money back? Why didn't you just give it to me? And so there's an education involved. And again, I'm not trying to make any value judgments. What I'm trying to do is really carefully understand what this process, this logic model is for a microfinance organization. So we are going to hopefully develop better microenterprises. What we do in our teaching, by the way, is we also teach them about what's called the value chain. That is, how to interact more effectively with consumers, with sellers in your business. How can you do better business? And we teach them skills around buying in bulk or offering a variety of products and services to their clients rather than one product or service. What do we expect will happen if we develop better businesses? what we think will happen is they will earn more money. Right? So they're able to earn more money. They're able to repay the loan better. So think about this. What you've got here is it's better for the individual micro-entrepreneur because they make more money. It's better for the microfinance organization because they get better repayment. So for us, the key to more successful microfinance was to help the client make more money. And so what we kept asking was, how do you help the client make more money? We need to do a better job of training the clients. That is, money is an important part. Providing capital, which microfinance does, is an important part of this, but it's just a part. That just providing capital doesn't solve the problem. Providing capital along with some kinds of trainings can solve the problem. Now, some would also say we should also train them, and you could put this in your logic model depending on your goal. Some would say we ought to train them on what to do with the money once they make it. So what we know is, in some microfinance organizations, some of the micro-entrepreneurs spend their money on nutrition and better housing and better education for their family. Some people take that money and spend it on alcohol. Do you want to spend? You could say that one of our objectives is we want to teach them what they should do with their money for the betterment of society. Or you may say that's not part of my objectives in my organization. It's a matter of deciding carefully what is it that you're trying to do. So I'm not making, again, a judgment that you should or shouldn't teach what people should do with their money in a microfinance organization. What I'm saying is you need to be clear what you're trying to do in your organization. And don't just tell me that I'm going to alleviate poverty by giving people loans. Because to me, you left out the logic, this causal linkage that's necessary to achieve success. So, and in terms of thinking about what this means, alleviate poverty, how would I know? So maybe it's better housing. Maybe it's better education. Maybe it's better nutrition. And again, what I'm suggesting is that I think it's important, if you were in a microfinance organization, that you articulate clearly what do you mean when you say I want to alleviate poverty. How would I know that if I saw it? And that to me is an important question. How would I know that poverty's been alleviated in my population that I'm trying to affect? Well, I might say the children in my microfinance organization, the children before I started, they only went to grade 5. Now they go to grade 7. Or before the housing we had holes in the roof and water used to come in. Now there's no more water coming in. Before I had a lot of children that had malnutrition. Now these children are getting fed better. So it's, and again, it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's around being clear about what it is you're trying to do. Until you're clear, I think you can't improve your organization. I don't think you can develop measures for what you're trying to do. And without the measures, I don't think you can improve internally or report externally. So what should you measure? I think what you should measure is all of this. Why? So we might say, let's just measure impacts. Measuring impacts is really important. But I want to understand what's working and what's not working. In order to do that, I need to measure the inputs, the processes, the outputs, the outcomes, and the impacts. So impacts is the results. Often in life, it's hard to measure just results. There are processes in place that we believe will lead to better success. So we may measure each of these things to help us understand where we are deficient. If I find that my clients are not making more money, there's been a problem here. Now, it could be that the logic is wrong. It could be that I just haven't thought this out well. It could be that the logic is just fine, but my implementation is bad. I didn't do a good job of training. And by the way, when we think about training, this is, I've developed a course and I'm running a course for micro-entrepreneurs. That's a process. Is anybody coming to my course? Christy and I did this big project in Nicaragua, training micro-entrepreneurs. And we developed this elaborate program, spent a lot of work on it. We were going to introduce it into the weekly loan meetings of the microfinance organization. About 2 weeks into this program, we get reports from the people because we had a staff of about a dozen people working on this with us. We get reports that a lot of people aren't coming to our training. And so we went back to the head of the microfinance organization and we said, you know, we're running this program. And they said, you know, we said, we're not getting a lot of attendance. And we said, they said, how many are you getting? I said, I don't know, like 50% attendance. They said, yeah. I said, no, that was surprising. We were expecting a lot more. They said, no, most people don't attend the microfinance meetings. Well, why didn't you tell us that? Well, it's common. Who attends? Sometimes it's the borrower. Sometimes it's the 11-year-old daughter of the borrower who just decides we're going to come pay back the loan. Sometimes it's a friend of the borrower. So we were doing this training, and sometimes we'd have the borrowers, sometimes we'd have their friends, sometimes we'd have their daughter. So when you talk about, is this a success, there are so many pieces in this that could be a problem in leading to any of these ultimate impacts. So when you're doing a logic model and when you're doing the measures, I think what you need is to be very specific on what it is we're trying to achieve, how we expect to achieve it, and how we will know whether we're achieving it. So what do the measures look like? The measures need to be indeed measurable with targets. So it's not, I want to train some micro-entrepreneurs. It's, I want to train 50 micro-entrepreneurs. That's my goal. I want to train 60% of the micro-entrepreneurs. I need a number. So it needs to be either a number or a percentage or an increase in six. I need to know, there needs to be a number here. Developing better enterprises. What does that mean? It means they need to make $100 more income per month. They need to have 30% higher profit per month. I need to have a number there that I know, that I, because I'm going to give you something to work on in just a few minutes. What I'm going to want to know is, when I see this number, when I see your actual performance, can I tell whether you succeeded or not? That's my question. So you can't just put a description in here. Yeah, I think they're better than they were before. I need something that says, you said you're going to increase income by 20%. Did you increase income by 20% or not? If you did, that's great, you were successful. If you didn't, then I don't think you were successful. And so you say you want higher repayment rates. Well, are there indeed higher repayment rates? We can find this out. I describe this, and again, I know that many of you have worked on this. This is not easy. I'm going to say this right now. I'm going to give you a little exercise. Some of you may have done this. We're going to work on it here and then talk about it. But it's not easy here, and the largest and best corporations in the world find this not easy. But it can be done. Let me give you two quick stories, and then I want to start on to do this little exercise. One organization that I've worked with, great organization. It's an organization called Kaboom. It's a nonprofit organization in the US. They build playgrounds, either new playgrounds or they rehabilitate old playgrounds in inner cities. They've done thousands of them in the US. When we first started talking, I said, so what is it that you want to do? Well, they said, well, we want to do is build playgrounds. And I said, what's the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal is, we think that if there's safer playgrounds, kids will run around more in the playgrounds, they'll play more, and if they play more, there will be less obesity. So we want to reduce childhood obesity. I said, great. What are you measuring? Well, it's obvious, they say to me. We're measuring the number of playgrounds built. I said, great, number of playgrounds built. So you're out there building playgrounds, and you're telling me the outputs. But that doesn't tell me your impacts. I think my sense is that building playgrounds is a good thing. But whether that links to lower levels of obesity is unclear to me. It might be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying it's not clear that it's true. What could be happening? It could be that they build new playgrounds and no additional people play on it. So I need to know that people are playing on it more than they were before. Because there's lots of things that could be happening at the playground without kids going and playing more. Maybe they put the wrong equipment and kids don't like the playground anymore. Maybe it's become dangerous and drug dealers are there, so they don't go there. So what we need to do is measure these other parts of it to know whether we're successful. One more short anecdote, and this is going back to microfinance. A microfinance organization that Christy and I worked with is called Opportunity International. They operate in about 30 countries. So they're a faith-based organization. What is their goal? Social, economic, and spiritual improvement. Because they're faith-based, spiritual is one part of it. And I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but let's just think about one part. Spiritual. How would you measure spiritual? How would you know whether you've had spiritual improvement on the part of your clients? Anybody? Well, what would be an indicator? What would you look at to possibly say, yes, we've made a spiritual improvement in our clients?
We're trying to convert clients to a particular religion.
So it could be that we're trying to convert them to a particular religion. This is a Christian-based organization. Sometimes they have Muslim clients. So it could be they'd say, how many did we convert from Islam to Christianity? Okay, so that could be one. What else?
Change lifestyle.
Change the lifestyle. Okay, so we could say there are certain indicators that we think are indicators of a more spiritual life. And what might those be?
Calm in crisis. Calm in crisis.
Calm?
Calm in the crisis.
Calm?
Calm. Relax.
Oh yeah, all right, so calm. So how would I measure that?
Through the month whether they've been lost their cool.
Looking at the whole community, I may want to look at whether my clients are in jail less or have committed fewer crimes, so I might be able to do that. Some things I'll just, some have suggested when I was doing with the organization, church attendance. Okay, so that's one way to think about it. I'm not saying that's right. Church attendance. So do people go to church more? Okay. Someone else says closeness to God. Okay. Fine. How would we measure that? So whatever, I'm willing to go with anything you suggest because you're deciding, right? You're deciding what you think spiritual improvement is. But they're different if what I'm counting is the number of people I've converted from Islam to Christianity. That's a measure. And if that's what you've defined as closeness to God, that's fine with me. And we can measure that. But you need to go, I need to force you to that specificity for me to be able to do this. So I can measure spirituality once we agree on what we mean by spirituality. So I can say church attendance, and some of you are saying that's a good measure, and some of you are saying I don't think that's the right measure of spirituality. And you don't need to agree, but if the organization says church attendance is it, then I can measure how many times a month are you going to church. And you were going twice a month to church, now you go 3 times a month to church. I think I've enhanced your spirituality based on my definition. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is come up with, be very specific about your measures for your organization, given what you are trying to do. And I'm going to encourage you to keep the number of measures small. So what does that force you to do? It forces you to be reasonably narrow about what is it I'm trying to do and what is it I'm trying to achieve. What we've learned in the corporate sector and what we've learned in psychology and what we've learned in the nonprofit sector is people can only manage a small number of numbers. I've worked with some of these organizations and I go in and I say, and they say, yeah, we've really got these metrics down. I said, how many do you have? They say 200. I can't start with 200 numbers. So what I'm looking for is you to identify your input, processes, outputs, outcomes, and impacts, and maybe like 3 or 4 measures for each one of those. To identify what those things are clearly and then measure them. And so my microfinance organization story is one that shows you even on something as nebulous as spirituality, we can define what we mean by spirituality. And once we do that, then it causes a discussion. What is that discussion? And I want to wrap up here. What is that discussion? That discussion is, what do we mean? What are we trying to do? And what always happens in this is that if you were to sit down with your organization and discuss your measures, your logic model and your measures, what I typically find is debates. What happened in this organization, I discussed their measures with their board of directors. 40 people on their board, and there were arguments, discussions during the entire time. Because someone said almost exactly your words. This is about converting people to Christianity. Another person said, that's not about that at all. That's not what we're trying to do. We want them to be more spiritual in any religion they choose. Well, those are very different views about what success is. And someone else says, no, it's about going to church. It's hard to develop a program to achieve success if your views of success are very different. And so that's why I think this is important.